Welcome to the ATA podcast, where we talk to former elite athletes sharing their insights and wisdom derived from successfully transitioning into life beyond the game. A very warm welcome to the Athlete Transition Accelerator podcast. Carl and I once again are joined by a fascinating guest, our first female guest, which is wonderful to have. We're welcoming Jess Roper, a former professional kickboxer, a two-time English kickboxing champion. So I know this is going to be a fascinating conversation. Very warm welcome to you, Jess. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you both for welcoming me and everybody who's listening.
You're very, very welcome. Now, why we normally start the conversations, because this is very much about transition, about supporting athletes and overcoming their fears and their apprehension about what comes after sport. We tend to have a little dive into, tell us a couple of instances, a couple of chapters, a couple of achievements, if you will, that bring you a sense of pride. And we're going to ask you that question. But I have to ask you before that, because I know you're very big now on inspiring people, and I imagine this will inspire just in the nature of the story. But what took you into kickboxing? I know you've posted and commented about that male-dominated environment. Obviously, it's supremely physical, supremely challenging. I'm just curious, what attracted you to say, right, I'm going to become a kickboxer? Where did that interest begin, Jess?
The original motivation was to get fit. I was 19 years old. I was weak mentally and physically. Kickboxing terrified me, but it intrigued me. So I tried kind of the usual. I gave running a go and didn't really like it. I gave Pilates a go. It wasn't for me. I'm not knocking running or Pilates. They're both fantastic. And then my partner, he went kickboxing. He was a natural. He's a 6'4", 100-kilo-ish man. He could head kick when he walked in. He's an obvious kickboxing champion.
Right.
I was not. I was less than 8 stone and the only female. So when I first walked in, I was terrified. I was surrounded by all these big, strong men, and I wanted to get fit. So that's what they helped me do. I started with having to learn everything, learning footwork, learning how to defend, so the martial arts side of it. It's not always, I had no intention of fighting. It's not about, I wasn't aggressive. I didn't have anything to prove to anyone other than myself. And my focus was on building up my strength and fitness.
Love it. And that makes perfect sense. I suppose the intrigue is then you go from that overwhelming, stepping into a completely alien environment, 8 stone, never done it before, and somewhere along this journey you become two-time English champion. So there'll be all manner of things I'm sure you can talk about within the sporting chapter. But if I challenge you to say one or two things, when you look back on your career, what fills you with a sense of pride? What comes to mind when I ask you that question? I know there'll be multiple things, but if you had to pick one or two.
One or two, I'm going to go for two, and they're the obvious ones, but becoming a black belt and becoming a champion. They black belt, I always knew I wanted to achieve and always worked towards. A champion was I wonder what if, but I didn't believe in my capability. But through progression and dedication, I achieved them both, thankfully. It's slightly different. If I had to pick one, black belt means the most to me, but I'm most proud of champion.
And how long, because you were doing it professionally, Jess, so how long, just give us a snapshot on that timeline from walking in the gym, as you say, 8 stone, never having done it before, complete novice. How many years later did you become an English kickboxing champion? What was that time period?
I'm going to have to correct you. I'm not actually a professional. I was always...
Right. Well, I'm going to shoot my researcher, which is me and Carl. So we're going to shoot ourselves there because we had something come up that said it was professional. So apologies for that and appreciate your correction. So tell us nonetheless when you became a champion. Educate us for our ignorance there.
So there isn't a very big professional kickboxing scene. If you want to go professional, you want to go to boxing or MMA, mixed martial arts, if you want to make money. K1 kickboxing is up and coming if you follow one championships, especially more than the UFC and everything. But without going into details, I was an amateur kickboxer who worked my way up to becoming a champion. So everything that was involved, I trained 6 days a week. I was training 15 plus hours a week, obviously factoring in all of the recovery necessary for the high intensity that I was working at. But my profession, my background was actually hospitality. That was how I
Right.
earned income. I do know a lot of professional athletes also have to supplement their income with other work too.
Yes.
But I wouldn't knock, and I wouldn't say I had an amateur mindset. I had a professional mindset. I was determined to achieve, but in an amateur environment.
Yeah, yeah, and unfortunately, that is a path that we do encounter a lot. I mean, you go back not that long ago. I'm showing my age now, but rugby, the sport that Carl and I progressed in, only became fully professional rugby union in the 90s, and many people were working full time. We talk a lot with Olympic athletes who have to make a phenomenal sacrifice. They're not earning anything other than their expenses, really. And so it isn't unheard of, but I do have the utmost admiration for the physicality of what you'll have gone through whilst also working in that environment. And I'm sure once or twice you've walked in and had some funny looks at work. No doubt there was some bruises and some injuries that you must have sustained in that arena to then step into the hospitality arena and get a few quizzical looks.
Yeah, it was a tough time of my life. I'm glad I did it in my 20s. I'd be struggling now, I think. I'm only in my 30s, but I was either working or training or sleeping or eating.
Yeah,
That was my life. Thankfully, I didn't have too many injuries, a couple of black eyes. But
right.
as I say, especially in the schools, I worked hard on improving my defense because the objective is to not get hit. It's
Yeah.
not just about hitting people, it's about learning how to defend too, first and foremost.
Absolutely. And you talk about the schools. I'm going to come on to that. But just before we move on from that chapter, because our poor research aside, you went from novice to champion. And I think that's part of the inspiration for me outside in. I love the fact that you came from a standing start at 19 years of age and then achieved the sort of pinnacle. So how old were you when you became a champion? I'm just curious for people listening to hear that dedication, that journey. How old were you then when you became a champion for the first time?
I was 26, nearly 26.
26.
Yeah.
Right. Fabulous. So another display of persistence and tenacity that you stepped in at 19 and all those years later reached that pinnacle. So I'm genuinely fascinated because I think it takes a huge amount to step into any sort of combat sport and particularly when you come from that complete novice position. But the real focus of why we're talking and why we spend so much time talking with athletes is to explore that journey of transition. So before we dive back into the actual transition sort of period of your life, can you just give the listeners a little bit of a flavour of what you do now, Jess? Obviously, as you said, you've retired from that world now. You're no longer in the kickboxing space as a competitor. So how would you articulate what you do now?
I am a professional speaker. So my big dream, the goal that I was working towards, evolved from becoming a kickboxing champion to speaking on stages globally. I decided that in a pandemic, in a lockdown, and I reached out to Chris Cook. So he's actually an ambassador for you, I know, and
Yeah.
Yep.
hopefully the listeners have heard his episode. If not, they can go back and listen. It's a good one. And basically, what he does is where I want to get to. He's kind of 10 years ahead of me, following in his footsteps, that kind of leadership, coaching, speaking. And that was how I took my first steps into what I now do. So, what do I do? It's a combination of working in schools, so motivating and inspiring future champions. They are the leaders of the future, and working with current corporate leaders. So I work across Europe. I've delivered workshops, keynotes in Thailand. That's the highlight of my career so far.
Fabulous.
Working with companies, leaders, senior directors, and using the lessons learned from elite level combat sport and applying them to a high performing environment to help them become the best they can be and achieve the results they desire to achieve.
Fabulous. No, I love it, and I know you've got a particular. You touched on it, and it's a wide range that you're delivering there, which is great. But you've got a particular focus, haven't you, on schools, as you say, inspiring the next generation. I saw on one of your posts you've engaged and spoke to over 20,000 school children. Now you've been in over 100 schools, which I think is phenomenal.
Yeah, that was the foundation of my speaking career. So I'm in this, I guess, if we're going for transition, maybe now I've transitioned from my athletic career to my school speaking to career to now working more with an adult corporate audience. But I never plan to stop working with young people, children, and the schools, because it's so rewarding. It has the impact, and who knows what the world's going to be like in 20 years with the technological advancements and everything. But we will need people. They will need to be resilient to succeed. So all of the messages that I share, they go from as young as a 4-year-old up to the CEO of a company.
Yeah, and I think, well, I've got 2 daughters, and that where is the world going to be is a question my wife and I often talk about, which is probably an appropriate thing to mention as well, because I know from some of your posts and some of your comments, Jess, you recently become a mum yourself, haven't you? So that's another big part of transition and a new chapter in your life. And before we came on air, you were talking about your brother's in charge of your little one. So fingers crossed, and all is well in the background.
There's no returning home with a screaming baby, so all is good, hopefully. And yes, that's probably the biggest transition of my life, becoming a mother. I thought that I'm a black belt twice. I'm a second dan black belt. I've done 2 over 5-hour grueling gradings. I'm a champion twice. I have beaten the best in the country. How hard can it be to be pregnant, give birth, and recover from that? Because that's what women do if they choose to. It's harder, definitely. It's 9 months to start off with. I've never had a 9-month fight camp. My fight camps were usually 8 to 12 weeks. The recovery was longer than any injury I'd ever had, and you don't get to sleep. I've got a baby. He's 4 months old now. I still haven't slept through the night. And my whole priorities have shifted. It's no longer just about me. It is about me as well. I still want to be the best I can be, but I want to be the best I can be for him as his mother. And it's now my job to help him become the best that he can be. So it's very similar to my motivations for kickboxing, in terms of, I always knew I wanted to be a coach. I didn't know I wanted to be a fighter. Fighting happened as an evolution of wanting to prove I could push my limits and face the fear and overcome that almost terror. Like, I was terrified of fighting, but I was like, how can I coach other people if I can't do it myself? So I persevered with it.
That's interesting, Jess. Sorry to jump on there, because that's something that Carl and I know this is an area that you research heavily, isn't it, Carl? The plan, how it all came about. So I'll throw it back to you, Carl. But with you saying I always wanted to be a coach, I know that's something you'll want to pick up on here, Carl, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. So really digging into the transition, and we've already gone off on a few different tangents on the transitions that you've made, but yeah, it's always an area of, what did that period of transition look like, and how clear were you on the pathways that you were going to take post elite competition? So if you can just take us back to that period of leaving kickboxing, going into your next chapter, was there firstly a catalyst for that choice to move on? Because usually there's 3 different areas. It's an injury that's occurred, unfortunately, that sort of forces that retirement, potentially not in kickboxing, but the financial structure of your sport, and so the direction it's going, or it's your choice. So firstly, just give us an insight into what that period looked like from a catalyst standpoint, but also, were you clear on where you were going next, or was there sort of an evolution once you left sport to get to coaching?
So there wasn't a clear moment. There was and there wasn't. I think the first catalyst was the global pandemic. So I won both of my belts in 2019. I won the under 53 kilo in July, and I won the under 56 kilo in November. I also got my second Dan black belt 6 days later. So I finished 2019 on a massive high. The result of lots of losses and accumulating improvements, and everything started to go well in my kickboxing career. And I was on a trajectory to fight for a British title in May, and then fly out to the World Championships in the summer of 2020. Obviously, that didn't happen. because of the pandemic. And in that time, I used it. I was studying nutrition. I studied hypnotherapy. So I did a lot of work on myself, whilst these were tools that I wanted to use in my coaching and to be able to better help performance anxiety, specifically with fighters. But it made me realize who I am and what I value, my motivations. And I realized that the coaching and the helping others meant more to me than doing it myself. But then I had to resolve the piece of, if I'm not continuing, why will anyone listen to me? I still felt like I had to keep fighting. So we came out of lockdown and I was tempted to be retired, but couldn't accept it yet. I was struggling internally with that battle. And I knew that I wanted to transition into speaking. I had my new big goal, global stages, bigger. I didn't plan to be a world champion. I was like, I'm happy with the level I got to. I never thought I'd have got here. I'm happy to stop and switch focus, hypothetically. Then the opportunity arose to go for that British title. She is undoubtedly the best in Britain, or was back in 2021. So I thought, okay, I'll do that. I'll win and I'll retire with 3 belts. British champion, 2 times English, done. I lost that fight, which obviously didn't go to plan. And I had to then battle with, how can I talk about never giving up if it now looks like I've given up? And I have worked on that myself. And I now know that I didn't give up. I chose to move on. There's a difference between quitting because it got tough and knowing when the time is right. I had some people saying, oh, but you could beat her. You could do this and that and blah, blah, blah. You can focus on like avenging that loss. And I'm really glad I didn't listen to those people. I'm glad I listened to my coach, my friends, my family, and most importantly, myself, because I knew the time was right. So almost the lockdown, but then in the end, I guess it was me that chose to retire.
Yeah, no, that's a wonderful answer, Jess. And there's a couple of things to pull out because of the themes we encounter so often when we're talking to athletes. That notion of trusting your own gut, your own sixth sense of when's the right time, because we all too frequently hear from athletes who are still in a profession that they're no longer enjoying. Now, that's not been disrespectful to any particular sport. It could be that their body's falling apart on them. There's so much time now it takes to recover and get back to competitive standards, or because they're just falling out of love of the discipline and the grind of what they have to do. But why do they stay? Because people around them are expecting them to stay. And they almost feel, well, this is my identity, this is who I am. And we spend a lot of time coaching people to say, this is a part of who you are. This is a chapter, but there's another chapter waiting. And trust your gut. If you think it's the right time, then let's go with that. Now, part of the reason why we're so passionate about what we do is people can say, well, that's all well and good, but I haven't got a plan. I haven't got anything to sort of step into, which is why we always advocate, wherever you are on your career, whether you're 19 or 50, start investing in the future. You may not need it tomorrow, you may not need it for a decade, but one of the ways to prevent you listening to some of those voices and staying in an environment you no longer wish to be in is to have a plan running alongside it, which takes me into another point that you made, which is good for you, that you were invested in yourself, as you said, in your growth. You're studying, you're doing hypnotherapy, you're looking at different ways to move you towards your dream. And I notice on the headline behind you there, you've got that dream big headline. Well, I think that's really important when we're talking about transition. It's not, well, I'll just drop off and I'll do something really low level. No, have a dream, have something to shoot at. And you've talked about global stages. You didn't step straight onto a global stage. As you've alluded to, you went into the school environment because it's tremendously fulfilling, but no doubt you honed your craft, as it were. You tested different material, you became more polished, which has allowed you to run the schools with the corporates. So I think it's certainly not quitting. I think it's a really good case study, Jess, about trusting your own gut and stepping out at a time that's right for you. And combat sports, boxing particularly over the years, is littered with people who stayed on too long. And it's almost a travesty. You watch people taking punishment they don't need to take. So I think it's certainly a positive from our perspective rather than a negative. And it's something that I'm delighted you've alluded to, because a lot of people say, well, it's not as easy as that. You can't just call the shot. Well, you did. You decided now's the time, and out I come.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of points. Firstly, I'm glad that everything you do exists because athletes need it, and I needed it at that time because it's really hard to make that decision.
Mm.
And I worked a lot on myself, but it's important to have a mentor or a coach or both. Obviously, the term coach in a sporting environment is very different to a business environment, but I always had that coach in my corner. And without them, I had a team of three of them, but without my coaches in my corner, I would not have succeeded in the ring. And then deciding to move into business, as an entrepreneur, I guess, like, what title do I use? I'm self-employed, I'm a professional speaker, I'm a former kickboxing champion, now I'm a mum. We have those different identities and different, sorry, I'm just going to stop my cat scratching.
Don't worry.
The different identities, but at the time it felt like my identity was kickboxing and all-encompassing black belt champion coach. Then I met Chris Cook. So I mentioned him already, but he was that coach in my corner that helped me with my transition. And it took a lot of courage to ask for help, but that's what I needed to do. And I don't know where I would have been without him. I don't doubt that I would have succeeded, because everything that allowed me to become a champion, everything that I now talk about and coach on, is how I have succeeded in speaking globally. Mm-hmm. But having him there for support, someone 10 years further ahead, someone who I can kind of follow in his footsteps. Obviously, it's a different journey for every individual. We are all on our own unique path. But having someone to help you is essential, in my opinion.
And I think one of the things one of the reasons why we put Accelerator into our brand is that both Carl and I very much buy into that notion of accelerated learning. That for most things that we encounter, you've recently become a mum, and a huge transition for you. But obviously, you're not the first person to be a mum. You know, we're here on a podcast. We're not the first people ever to launch a podcast. So whatever facet of life you choose to look at, invariably, there are people who have walked the exact same path that you are currently on. And so it makes absolute sense to seek out those coaches and mentors, ask the questions you need to ask, download the information and the wisdom that you can gain to avoid the pitfalls that other people have already fallen through, to accelerate your learning and get to where you want to be. So Chris, as you said, great guy and an ambassador of ours, he helped you with those first steps. And it's a little bit about sort of momentum, isn't it? Once that momentum's up and running, and once you took that step, I'm sure things started to align. But where we find a lot of fulfillment is just encouraging people to make that first step, to believe that there is another chapter. For the majority of elite sportsmen and women, they will be in the chapter beyond sport for far more time than the chapter they were in. You know, you talked about most of your 20s, but you could be a speaker for decades, Jess. So actually having the courage to take that step, because it's not, well, this might or might not work. Well, you've got your whole life ahead of you. So I think that's really important to find. Those coaches and mentors can come from anywhere, and be bold enough and brave enough, you talked about courage, to just ask. Because as we always advocate with people, you will rarely offend anybody if you make contact and say, I really admire or respect what you've done in area ABC. Would you mind if I picked your brains and met for a coffee or had a virtual chat? Very few people are going to find offensive that simple question, and they will give you your time and it will take you on that step. But I also want to just pick up on the notion of entrepreneurship with you, Jess, because a lot of athletes that are still competing are talking to us about various business ideas they've got. They may be actively starting the ball rolling, they may be involved, or it may just still be an idea in the head. But there's definitely a groundswell, a desire to become an entrepreneur. How have you found that experience? Because I had a lovely articulation. I think it was Simon Squibb. I was listening to a podcast, and he talked about entrepreneurship being the ability to plan your day. He liked the fact that you are under all the pressure, but you have all the control and you can plan and structure your day as you want to, which I thought was quite a nice way to frame it. But for many entrepreneurs, there's just high levels of pressure and stress at the beginning before you get to that. So how would you give a little snapshot into becoming an entrepreneur? Because I think a lot of people would be interested on that aspect from your perspective.
I would say there's a common theme running through the three facets and three transitions that I have been through, starting with the sport, the kickboxing, moving into entrepreneurship, moving into motherhood.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say the sport has allowed a foundation of a mindset for success. So you mentioned the dream big, which is on the newspaper clipping. My motto, just for clarity, and because it began in primary schools, dream big, start small, never give up. A really simple phrase, but simple doesn't mean easy.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say any entrepreneur has a dream. And linking back to Simon Squibb, I know his book, What's Your Dream? He is on a very aligned mission to myself in terms of it's encouraging individuals, whoever they may be, athletes across the board. What is your biggest vision? What is the highest version of yourself? What does success mean to you beyond the belts, titles, and trophies as a human being, encompassing all of your identities? Entrepreneurship allows you to identify the steps that you want to and are willing to take to do that. So to become a kickboxing champion, I had to do hill sprints. I had to do press ups. They're not always easy. When I became an entrepreneur, I had to practice and record and re-record radio episodes for a local radio show. And sometimes I was tired and I didn't want to, or I had to do that Facebook Live when I was terrified of my family judging me negatively. Why are we all afraid of negative judgment? I don't know. So there were those small steps towards the global stages. Nobody walks out to a massive audience, bright lights, thousands of people cheering their name. That is the highlight reel success and the foundation upon which is built over many years and much dedication. So for me, entrepreneurship is doing what is required to achieve that dream, but also having the flexibility and freedom to do what you want to do. You sacrifice some of the security. So it's the responsibility is on you. You have to take personal responsibility for what you're choosing to do. Same with becoming an athlete. It's not the most secure option. There's no guarantee you're going to win. There's no guarantee you're going to succeed in business. You don't have a paycheck every month. You don't have a retirement plan unless you make it happen. So I think athletes are inclined to want to be entrepreneurs because they have what it takes to succeed.
Yeah, I think well said. Really passionate and articulately positioned. But you're right. Yeah, athletes are used to putting it all on the line. You play well, you get picked for your team, or you fight well, you have more success. So I think you've articulated that very, very well, and I love that notion of dream big, start small, because momentum we talked about earlier in the episode, whether it's getting fit and healthy, whether it's building a business, whatever you're looking at, there's always those first steps. You just got to commit to taking those first steps. And the fear of judgment, we're all there, but there's so many wonderful analogies, and I come across this a lot, as does Carl, and we often say, you don't take any criticism personally from people that don't know you personally. You equally don't fear the judgment of people that you wouldn't go to ask for their respect, because it's a truism that I think we all recognize. Rarely do you get hate or criticism or negativity from people who are doing better than you. So invariably it's rooted in some form of envy, and it's got to be about narrowing down to be able to seek self-validation versus external validation. Look yourself in the eye and say, am I making progress? As you evidently are building your business here, Jess. So one of the things we always like to ask our guests is do's and don'ts, because I know we're getting a sense for you, and I believe you're probably of the mindset as we are that, well, there should never be any regrets. The journey takes you where the journey takes you. But that being said, I think there's quite a nice impact being able to tap into the benefit of hindsight, especially for those that are walking the path behind you, to hear from the wisdom of your hindsight. So if you had to think of a one or two, or just one do to aid the transition out of elite sport into life beyond, and perhaps something to avoid, a don't, to make that transition that little bit easier, what comes to mind from your personal journey to pass on a bit of that wisdom as a do and a don't, Jess?
I think do, I'm going to go with two,
okay,
but under one encompassing theme that we just discussed. But do think ahead, do think big. And so if you can do, like you said, any age, early, from 19, from 5, if you, however young you are, do think ahead, do dream big. And then in that actual transition, do ask for help, do have that coach in your corner, metaphorically, unless you're actually a ring sport athlete. And then it's impossible to actually achieve, but don't be afraid. But don't let fear hold you back. Fear of failure, fear of negative judgment, fear of whatever the fear is uniquely to you. So obviously you will feel fear. I talk about fear a lot. Like every time before stepping in the ring, I felt fear. Every time before stepping on stage, I felt fear. It means we want to perform well. As long as we can accept that we've done our best, we can accept the outcome and we can move on. But don't let it stop you. Find a way of overcoming the fear. Find a way of using it to fuel your moving forwards.
Yeah, well said. I love it. No, Jess, it's been really, really impactful listening to your story. I suppose a nice way to wrap things up is what you've talked a lot about dreaming big, and we often like to ask people, well, what does success look like? Previously in that combat kickboxing arena, there was a defined binary success. It was winning and losing contests. So I've got a sense of where you might go with this, but what's success for you now? What does articulate a little bit of that dream? I know it's going to come back to the speaking arena, no doubt. But how would you articulate success for Jess in this chapter?
Success for me in this chapter, I talk a lot about the big dream being speaking on stages globally, because that's the outside influence and everything around me, and I want to inspire, I want to raise future leaders, and my greatest success is in 20 years time walking into a company, because yes, I'll still be doing what I do now, just further ahead down the journey, and saying, I saw you when you were in my school, and since then I went into rugby, and then I, alongside that, studied a degree in law and became a successful law company. I don't know where that came from in my mind.
Yeah.
And then on a personal level, to speak on stages and have a home for me and my family. I don't talk about that part quite as much. It's not quite as catchy, but I have a 4-month-old son. I have my partner, and I want us to have a happy life and be healthy. Happy and healthy is success to me. And the champion part of me that likes pushing the limits does want those stages too.
Yeah, and I think anybody listening will absolutely resonate with that, and I'm sure that to the notion of inspiration, you'll have inspired a lot of people listening. I think you go right back to the origin of having the bravery and the courage to step into that hugely intimidating environment, carve out a career, become a champion, dream big, push through the pandemic, start your own business. And I think a real nod to the fact that you're suited to what you now do, and we hear this a lot with successful entrepreneurs, is they don't put a finite time frame on their career. Because they enjoy what they're doing, they just want to keep doing it. There is no retirement from their vocation when you truly find what you're passionate about. So I can fully anticipate that, as you said, you'll be doing this for decades to come. Jess, where can people find you if people want to reach out and connect? Where's the best place? I know I've seen you particularly active on LinkedIn. Is it LinkedIn? Where would you direct people to find you?
LinkedIn is my favorite platform. So Jess Roper on LinkedIn. Other people prefer Instagram. I am on there, so I am Jess Roper, but LinkedIn is my favorite. Yeah.
Fabulous. And I'm sure there'll be lots of people reaching out after this. So Jess, huge thank you from our perspective. It's been a pleasure talking to you. I know our relationship will continue to develop and evolve, and I sincerely hope that any young athletes listening will take inspiration, and particularly young female athletes, to have the courage to dream big, start small, and just get cracking.
Can I mention that?
Yes, absolutely.
Because we didn't discuss it. So in my kickboxing coaching career, not the corporates, I have specialized in working with women for 8 years. I started working in a local school with teenage girls. Then I started my own class as a female only kickboxing. I don't agree with keeping it female only. I think we should be fully inclusive, but women sometimes need that extra step, that extra support to overcome that fear, to then integrate. My goal is always integration. And over the years, I've learned more and more about our hormone health. Women are not small men. I listen to Dr. Stacey Sims a lot. That's her saying, I think. But the hormone health, the performance through all stages of female transition. So puberty, menstrual cycles, it's approximately 28 days, but we have a lot of transitions that men don't have. Then obviously perimenopause, menopause, pregnancy, motherhood, postpartum, all of these things. So any female athletes listening, and any coaches who coach female athletes, male or female coaches, do pay attention to the differences that women require over men. And yeah, my utmost respect to mothers who are also athletes, because my biggest motivation now in motherhood to not go back to fighting is so I can focus on my son and him becoming whoever he wants to be. But I do also know other female athletes. So the lady I lost to, the one I've got the utmost respect for, the British champion, her biggest motivation is to be that champion to inspire her son. So it just goes to show two very similar women have very different motivations.
And that's something, again, another very powerful point that you've wrapped the episode up with, that you've got to understand what drives you. It doesn't matter what drives anybody around you. You find your why, and that is a fuel that you can keep tapping into. And yet we would certainly endorse and echo men have it easy. You know, when you talk about all the challenges that women have to compete at the highest level, we echo the respects that you're giving there. And good for you, because again, I love this diversity of what you're doing. You're in the schools, you're in the corporate environment, you're coaching, you're helping women at various ages to step into that world, because we all know the benefits of physical activity and health, but there's those barriers of entry or those barriers of confidence. And like we said about stepping into our chapters after sport, you sometimes need the right coach, the right mentor, just to get you through those initial barriers, and then you've got the momentum, and then you're off and running. So no, I'm pleased you put that in at the end there, Jess. That was another powerful insight. So thanks again for your time, and we look forward to working with you further in the future.
Thank you,
Jess.
Thank you, Jess.
Thanks for joining us this week on our ATA podcast. If you found this conversation insightful and it resonates with your journey, please subscribe, follow the show, and stay connected with us for more insight, resources, and information on how we at ATA are supporting your preparation for life beyond the game.